Hi, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm Kathy Sloan, VP Government Relations for CCIA. Our next speaker is a native of Nebraska and a lifelong citizen of that heartland state where he and his wife are raising 3 sons. After graduating from the University of Nebraska and earning a law degree from Creighton, Mr. Terry served as both Vice President and President of the Omaha City Council. In Washington for his 7th term, Congressman Terry's priorities here have included balancing the federal budget, reducing our dependence on foreign oil, reforming our government to be more efficient, effective, and responsive to taxpayers. Lee Terry serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which has authority over telecommunications policy and the FCC. He's currently vice chair of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, and Congressman Terry has an extensive track record on reforming telecom subsidy programs to better serve rural households and businesses. Please welcome Congressman Lee Terry.
Well, thank you. I'm going to give a few thoughts, highlights, cut my speech down since I have to attend a meeting now with Corps of Engineers on flooding, since my district was flooded rather significantly last year. It's an important meeting. So with that, thanks for that introduction. And I am from Nebraska. I represent the part of Nebraska with people. And most of my district is cement and buildings. I have very little fields, but yet I've been known as the rural telecom guy. Because frankly, on telecommunications subcommittee and our Energy and Commerce Committee, there's only a couple people that really do understand rural America, and that's not a criticism, that's just a fact. And so I took up the charge for rural America. And one of the items that I've really tried to push is just like in the 1930s with AT&T wanting ubiquitous use of telephones, in a modern world, that's now broadband. And what I saw in rural America was the tale of 2 rural Americas. You had in one area, let's just say ABC Rural Telecom, that was rolling out advanced services, was doing a great job of providing more than the larger incumbents in an area next to them. And why? Well, you just had a different attitude, perhaps, where they really wanted to be leaders in telecom for their customers. And what I saw is they had to play a shell game with their USF funding, because USF says, under Universal Service Fund, you can only receive that to maintain. You weren't allowed to upgrade. You weren't allowed to go to fiber. You weren't allowed to go to, well, you could do fiber as long as it was just plain old voice, plain old telephone. So they'd rearrange everything. And then you'd have not only maybe a large company next door, but another small rural telecom that was doing absolutely nothing but taking USF dollars and not even really maintaining. And I thought that was wrong, and we needed to reform it and modernize it, where if you're going to take universal service funds, that you should then invest in modern technologies and offer the same packages for advanced services that cable companies and telecom companies were doing in more metropolitan areas. This was an 8-year fight. And then the FCC took it up by rule. And we worked as our committee. Rick Boucher and I got the coalition together the year before the 2010 happened, and Rick is now a consultant or working in a law firm and not with me in Congress on this. But we took it up as a small group within our committee. Long story short, we again got a consensus from the industry. That was the boilerplate for this new rule for the FCC. They were going to follow the old Terry Boucher bill, layer on with this new consensus agreement, and then a new rule came out, and it was totally different than our consensus in the bill. It was very frustrating, and I have to admit to you, as I stand here today, I still don't have my mind around this rule. And just last week, I met with one of our rural telecom companies in Nebraska, and I said, what have you figured out? And they said, we're still trying to get our mind around this rule. What we do know is with ICC reform and a significant reduction in what we'll be able to receive from USF, we don't know how we're going to get the money to roll out these new services that are now part of a mandate on us. So we have to work through some of those type of issues, and I understand this is going to be a long haul. I've already been asked to draft a new bill to counter the rule, but we really don't know what specifically would be in that bill yet. We've got to see this come out and really understand it at a much deeper level than some of the more superficial analysis that we've seen. But there's a lot of good things in there, so I don't want to leave an impression with you that the entire rule is bad. I think really limiting USF dollars when there is competition, even in a rural area, because what we've seen is you take a small town of 5,000 and they may have options, but you get 1 mile outside of that town and there's nothing. So, you know, in that town, why should they get universal service for competing in an area that may have 2 or 3 competitors, wireless, cable, whatever. But if they're still acting as the carrier of last resort, which is the mandate on the landlines, then they should remain eligible for USF dollars at a rate where they can survive and provide the services. So I'm not saying everything is bad in this rule, but the major issue then unleft in that is how are you going to get the money? The distribution side, they've resolved. We may have to repair, but now the issue is who's going to pay in. I have always thought that you needed the two together. You can't do distribution without solving the revenue issue. FCC decided to go one route, distribution. Now they're saying they'll go revenue. I frankly question whether they'll ever get to the revenue side because it is so controversial. Rick Boucher and I, very early in this process, 8 years ago, said this is for voice, and if it's not anyone whose primary objective is voice should pay into USF, regardless of technology. It was technologically neutral. Now, the primarily voice was a term of art because we didn't want services where voice was incidental. For example, we called this the Xbox exemption. Any of you play Xbox 360? You put on your headphones, or at least my 17-year-old and 14-year-old and 11-year-old do. Well, the 11-year-old's not allowed to use the headphone set yet, because I've heard the language on those. Anyway, we declared that that's an incidental. It's the game playing that's the primary. The talking to your high school buddies while they're sitting in their basement is an incidental. Now, how the FCC is going to resolve this, I don't know. But I will tell you that Congress is probably not going to take up a standalone, probably, I can't even imagine us doing it, a standalone revenue-raising bill. Just not going to happen. That's a political reality. So where we end up on the totality of USF reform, yet to be determined is the conclusion. Then one aspect that I want to talk about on spectrum. We need more spectrum. I'm glad we got the spectrum bill done. Now, is it going to be enough in the long run, enough spectrum? Probably not. But the immediate concern for us with spectrum is, will the FCC do the auction appropriately? Yes, we know they're going to do an auction. What does appropriate mean? In this room, we would probably have several definitions of what the appropriate criteria for the auction would be. Mine is do it so everyone can be involved. Any telecom company, any cable company. That means we may have to do it by sections or regions or whatever, but bring as many people in. Don't make the criteria so that only the richest are able to come in and compete. I have found through myriad of auctions that I've attended that the more people that you get involved to bid, the better the outcome for those raising the revenues. So we will work closely in our telecom committee and subcommittee to work with the FCC so that the ground rules are fair and everyone can participate. Last comment I want to make is on today's CISPA bill, the Rogers bill. Yes, that's a House intelligence, but cyber is a sweet spot for me and our committee. My comment is, I don't see the controversy. I know there's folks that were all, we just had from Ron, the talk on SOPA and PIPA, but those things are so far apart, the cyber bill and this, that I don't see why people are trying to marry the two. I'm confused why the president sent out a veto threat on something that is a real important foundational piece to cybersecurity. I've done a lot of work, a lot of study, I've talked to a lot of people, and I have concluded, after a year of really intensely throwing myself into this issue, that the more the government gets involved, whether it's Homeland Security or FCC, in setting rules for industry to comply to some cyber standards is counterproductive. You lock them into a position and you set them up. You set them up for failure. So the principles have to be flexibility and communications. And that's what the CISPA does. It breaks down the barriers to communication that exist today between the government and the private sector. Private sector needs information, for example, protecting the grid. If there is a direct threat known by NSA, DIA of an attack on our grid, all they can do under today's law is perhaps sneak a phone call to maybe the electric company for Wall Street, downtown Manhattan, and say, you may want to upgrade your cybersecurity because there may be something out there. Anything more than that would get a lot of people thrown in jail. So we have to break down those barriers so they can give specific information to those that need that specific information. This bill really sets that up. Then on the other side, in just the private sector side, we want to make sure that whether you're electric generators or your telecom companies or whatever, that you can get together and set up your own plans. Because frankly, even in the electrical generation or telecom, you may have several different standards for several different aspects within that same. And we need to allow them to get together and talk and determine what their best practices will be without threat of a Justice Department anti-trade investigation. Now you'll say, well, the Justice Department would never do that. Well, they probably wouldn't, but why don't we just give them the liability protections from the beginning? So so they will want to get together. Then, if one company says, well, we're not going to participate because we don't want to share our trade secrets and we think we get a competitive advantage, well, then let them be publicly criticized for that. But the government shouldn't be doing that. So that's just my editorial comment on CISPA and some controversies regarding civil liberties that I think have been significantly addressed in this. And frankly, at this point, with the changes, I just don't see what the controversy is. This is something we absolutely have to do. This isn't stealing a Sony movie. This is protecting our national security. So we need to do this. With that, I thank you for the opportunity to come here and speak. I went a little bit longer than I anticipated, but Ed, you're in charge.
Thank you very much, Congressman.
Well, thank you very much. You guys have a great conference. Oh, do you?
I wanted to thank you.
All right.
But I did want to give a chance for some questions.
I should remind everyone else, like myself, that I need to use the microphone. But we do, you know, we've been on tight schedule, but, you know, we got time for one question. I really know the Congressman's in the middle of a lot of important issues relating to us, so if I have one brief question, that'd be great.
Yes, sir.
Bill Warren.
Yeah.
Thanks for your comments on cyber and as well as on spectrum auctions. We fully agree with you on that. What's
Did
the,
I say it as you wrote it?
But
Just kidding.
as vice chair of the committee, what's on tap for the rest of the year? What kind of issues are you guys going to look into?
Well, I really don't, spectrum was our big issue that we really wanted to accomplish, so we got our major goal in it. We'll have some small cats and dogs, but really we'll probably spend most of the year in review. For example, one of the things that I've pushed and we have on our agenda list is reviewing the 92 Cable Act. In today's advanced technology world, does it even make sense? Are there barriers in that bill that may be blocking some technologies? So we're just going to take a look in our rear view mirror and see if there's things that we should be setting up for next year. So thank you. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.